Good morning. I'm just going to wait a few more seconds to get organized here. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. It is May 6th, 2022, and this is the hearing phase 1B with respect to the Kern River applications. I am Hearing Officer Nicole Kinsey with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom web conference and is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording and the Zoom generated transcript to the AHO FTP site. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If you are experiencing technical difficulties today trying to communicate with us, please send an email to the AHO at admin@hrgoffice@waterboards.ca.gov, and the AHO staff will be monitoring that inbox and will let me know. Assisting me today are the usual team, the staff of the Administrative Hearings Office, Nicole Mullen, Amy Blunk, Skylar Anderson, and Kyle Wooldridge. Ms. Mullen will be handling the screen sharing of exhibits and moving along of the slides. If you are a witness today, you may simply ask Ms. Mullen to advance to the next slide when you're ready during your testimony. And attorneys, you may ask Ms. Mullen directly to bring up a particular exhibit. If at any time I am experiencing technical difficulties today during the hearing and I'm not able to rejoin Zoom in quite short order, one of my staff will call a brief recess until I'm able to rejoin you. We will take breaks today. We will have morning breaks, lunch break, and so forth as we have. I will call at least an hour for lunch, but if any of you need a break, please just let me know as you have done and we can take a break. I will briefly move to appearances and roll over the appearances that we've already received this week, throughout the week, but I will pause briefly to see if there's anyone other than our witnesses who is joining us today for the first time this week and would like to introduce themselves. All right, we're all getting to know each other, so good. I believe we completed yesterday with Mr. Bell's testimony, which means that I think I will turn to you, Mr. Becerra, and maybe first ask if you can provide us with an planned order of your witnesses today, just for planning, and then we can move on.
Yes, we plan to call Dr. Littlefield first, then Dr. Miller, Dr. Howes, and then Mr. Kika.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra.
And I just want to express my appreciation to everyone for helping us get Mr. Bell home to his family before Mother's Day yesterday. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you for being efficient. We may make it through here. I think with that, Mr. Becerra, we can, are there any other procedural matters we should address this morning before we get started with Dr. Littlefield's summary of his testimony? Mr. O'Brien.
Ms. Kinsey, there was one small matter relating to the errata that we had filed that Ms. Tokar is prepared to discuss with you.
Thank you. Ms. Tokar, I will turn it over to you. My understanding is at least one of the exhibits was an errata, and I want to make sure that we have on the record that it is the errata we are accepting into the administrative record.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kinsey. So what I think we need to do, and what I will now do, is offer KWBA 149 and 150 into the evidentiary record. Both of these documents were filed with the AHO on April 22nd, 2022. The first, KWBA 149, is the Kern Water Bank Authority's notice of errata, an intention to correct the testimony of Jeffrey Davids. And then the second, KWBA 150, is the declaration of Jeffrey Davids in support of that errata. So I guess I will offer those two additional exhibits at this time.
Thank you. Are there any objections to accepting these two exhibits into the evidentiary record?
No objections from Buena Vista.
Thank you. Then with that, KWBA 149 and 150 are accepted into the evidentiary record. Thank you for cleaning that up with us, Ms. Tokar.
Thank you.
Is there anything else we should address before I hand things over to Mr. Becerra? All right, Mr. Becerra, are you ready to call Dr. Littlefield?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
I'm sure I'm scanning my screen to see when, there we are.
Ms. Mullen, you have read our minds once again.
Yes. Good morning, Dr. Littlefield. And I think you need to come off mute so we can all hear you.
Good morning, Ms. Kinsey.
Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Ms. Mullen. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I will now swear in the witness and then I'll hand it over to you. I know we've had a long week. Will you please raise your right hand, Dr. Littlefield? Dr. Littlefield, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Becerra, you may proceed.
Ms. Mullen, can you please bring up exhibit Buena Vista 602? Good morning, Dr. Littlefield.
Good morning, Mr. Becerra.
Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Douglas, middle initial R, Littlefield, Littlefield.
And Dr. Littlefield, is exhibit Buena Vista 600 your written testimony in this matter?
It is.
Do you need to make any corrections to exhibit Buena Vista 600?
I have one extremely small correction. That's on page 53 of my complete written testimony. It's paragraph 126, line 17. You'll see the year 1916 in that line, and that should actually be 1919. It's a reference to the Lippincott Means Report, and all the other citations to the report in my written testimony are correct. They're all 1919.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield. Is exhibit Buena Vista 601 your curriculum vitae?
Yes, it is.
Can you please describe your professional qualifications briefly?
I have a PhD in American history from UCLA. I've done historical consulting work now for over 35 years on water rights, rivers, land use history, and other environmental matters. I've provided court declarations or affidavits or testimony in federal and state courts, including on the Kern River. I testified in two different proceedings on the Kern River. One was in 1990, where I testified in Nickelby, California, about the navigability of the Kern River. I testified for over 8 days in that case, and the judge based his opinion largely on my historical testimony. I also subsequently testified in North Kern versus Kern Delta, involving water rights on the Kern River. I also have testified before the State Water Resources Control Board in the past. The first time was in 2005 when I testified regarding Lake Arrowhead and the Lake Arrowhead Community Services District, regarding the development of their water rights in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I've participated in 5 original jurisdiction actions before the United States Supreme Court. One of those was Kansas v. Colorado, and I went for a personal best in that one and testified for 11 days. The other one was Montana versus North Dakota and Wyoming. And last, I've written a peer-reviewed scholarly book on the Kern River and its water rights entitled Ruling the Waters, California's Kern River, the Environment, and the Making of Western Water Law. And other information is both in my vita and also on my webpage.
Dr. Littlefield, did your testimony in the Lake Arrowhead matter concern pre-1914 appropriative rights?
My understanding is that was the outcome of the State Water Board proceedings.
Thank you. Dr. Littlefield, is Exhibit Buena Vista 602 a summary of your written testimony?
It is.
Are Exhibits Buena Vista 603 through 675 the exhibits to your written testimony?
They are.
And Dr. Littlefield, using Exhibit Buena Vista 602, can you please summarize your testimony?
Okay, this is a brief overview of the material covered in my complete written testimony, which is dated April 1, 2022. And the historical record of the Buena Vista Water Storage District is very long and complex. And so this presentation is aimed at providing an overview to make understanding the longer testimony easier. This presentation is based largely on historical maps because they provide an excellent means of illustrating the history of the district and its water rights. Next slide, please. We can skip this slide. This has been covered pretty thoroughly in other testimony. This is a slide showing a Google Earth view of the southern San Joaquin Valley in 2021. If you drive down Interstate 5 today, which you can see on the slide here, into the southern San Joaquin Valley, you'll see that the southern San Joaquin Valley is characterized by mile after mile of agricultural lands, as this Google Earth map shows. But in 1850, the same area looked vastly different. At that time, the San Joaquin Valley was characterized by several large but shallow lakes, and you can see where they used to be circled in the red circles on this map. And those lakes were surrounded by tule bogs and marshes for hundreds of square miles. This slide shows where the lakes used to be, the red circles, and you can see that Tulare Lake is the northernmost and by far the largest. Buena Vista Lake was down into the lower left, and then Kern Lake was the smallest, about where California Highway 99 merges with Interstate 5 going south. Next slide, please. I was retained by the Bakersfield law firm of McMurtry, Hartsock, Worth, and St. Lawrence to provide answers to 4 historical questions. Those are presented here. They are also in my written testimony. In summary, they basically relate to the Buena Vista Water Storage District's history in relation to its historical water uses, historical diversion points for that water, the history of storage by the district, and there's also an epilogue in my written testimony, which I'll talk about a little bit here, describing the State Water Resources Board's 1964 decision 1196 and the subsequent order 89-25. Next slide, please. This is entitled A Map of a Part of Kern County compiled from official surveys and records 1877. This map shows water and irrigation features in the southern San Joaquin Valley as of that year. It also shows swampland districts. Swampland districts were organized under state laws in order to drain the San Joaquin Valley marshes and reclaim the lands for farming. There were 2 districts in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Both of them were formed in 1870. One of them was Swampland District 111, which you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. It was just south of Bakersfield. And the other was Swampland District number 121, which was the direct predecessor of today's Buena Vista Water Storage District. The main parts of Swampland District number 121 are also the forerunners of the district's main service areas and features, including the Buttonwillow Service Area, the Maple Service Area, the West Side Canal, and the main drain, which you can see also on this map. You can also see Buena Vista Lake, which became a major source of storage and irrigation water for Swampland District 121. Next slide, please. This is the official map of Swampland District 121 that was created shortly after the district was formed in 1870. As I noted before, Swampland District 121 was the direct predecessor of the Buena Vista Water Storage District. And a few years after this map was created, Swampland District number 121 filed 3 water rights claims on the Kern River. These are spelled out in detail in my written testimony, but in short, one of the claims was from Buena Vista Slough for water that would be taken into the West Side Canal. Another was for water taken into the East Side Canal. And the third one was for appropriating water for storage in Buena Vista and Kern Lakes. Next slide, please. This map is a part of California State Engineer William Hammond Hall's 1886 irrigation map of the southern San Joaquin Valley. Before I say anything further about it, I want to point out that while the map was published in 1886, the data that went into creating this map was probably accumulated shortly after William Hammond Hall was hired to investigate California's water resources and irrigation circumstances. That means his engineers were in the field after 1879 and in the early 1880s. This is one of many of Hall's maps that did relating to his work, and the maps are almost works of art, I would say. The map shows not only swampland districts number 111 on the right and 121 on sort of the south area and on the west area, but it also shows areas that were being developed for agriculture to near Bakersfield and then to the northwest of Bakersfield by land mogul James B. Hagan and several of his partners. And at about the same time, Swampland District 121 was being taken over by Miller and Lux, Henry Miller and Charles Lux. Miller and Lux were particularly upset by the development of irrigation just south of Bakersfield and along what's listed as the Callaway Canal there, northwest of Bakersfield, because all that water leaving the river no longer made it down to Miller and Lux's lands and the Swampland District 121. And the result was they sued Hagan claiming riparian rights. As we all know, the result of this lawsuit was the famous decision in Lux v. Hagan, one of the most important in California Supreme Court history. But on a more specific note, the importance of the case was partly that the case was sent back to the trial court for more testimony and evidence on a couple of additional points. Both Hagan and Miller and Lux feared that this was going to cause a lot more expensive litigation, and as a result, they settled the case in the famous 1888 Miller-Hagan Agreement. Next slide, please. The 1888 Miller-Hagan Agreement not only created first and second points of measurement that have been pretty thoroughly discussed in the previous testimony in this case, but they also provided that the two parties, Hagan and then Miller and Lux, pay for and build structures to improve access and reliability of the water allocated to second point of measurement. You can see those structures on this particular map. Starting at the top, there were two levees that were built to channel the Kern River more directly into Buena Vista Lake. And then going counterclockwise, you can see Buena Vista Slough. Going to the southern part of the map, one of the other things that was required was a levee along the east side of Buena Vista Lake in order to keep those flows from overflowing toward Kern Lake. And then the 1888 Miller-Hagan Agreement also required the construction of an inlet canal to bring the Kern River's waters into the lake, and then an outlet canal which improved Buena Vista Slough when those waters were released for use in Miller and Lux's lands. Next slide, please. Because of the improvements brought about by the 1888 Miller-Hagan Agreement, Miller and Lux essentially had several decades of developing its ranch and farmlands. This is a map showing how some of that development took place. This map was created in 1919 by engineers Joseph P. Lippincott and Thomas Means, both of whom were highly respected water engineers in the American West. And it was for an appraisal of Miller and Lux's property because Miller and Lux at the time was getting ready to start selling some of its real estate. What you see on the map is the yellow area are lands that were served by the East Side Canal and the West Side Canal with gravity flows. The light blue areas next to the yellow not only had gravity flow, but also were served by supplemental wells. The light green area at the top, or the northern end of the map, was area that we've been discussing earlier in this testimony, that was north of today's California State Highway 46 or Wasco Road. That land did not regularly get water unless it was flood flows or excess releases from Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. And then the brown areas that you can see kind of running toward the top of the map were simply grazing lands that didn't get water at all. Another feature of this map that's important for my discussion a little bit later is you can see the oil producing lands just north of Bakersfield and then to the west of the Buena Vista Lake. So by 1919, Miller and Lux's water supplies had become much more reliable because of the structures that had been built, as well as storage in Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. And as a result, Miller and Lux farmed lands in the district, the future district's Buttonwillow service area, and raised grains and forage for cattle. They also did similar activities in the Maple service area. They also rented farmlands to tenant farmers, both in the lake bed itself when it wasn't full of water, and they provided water to those tenants for growing crops. The tenants paid on a sharecropping basis. Between the tenant farmers and Miller Lux's own farming, there were multiple types of crops that were grown. Grains obviously were the largest amount, but there were other crops grown as well. This, according to crop reports in the Miller and Lux papers at the Bancroft Library, these crops included sugar beets, corn, pumpkins, carrots, and many of these crops were used to feed thousands of hogs that were raised in the vicinity. And of course, Miller and Lux raised thousands of head of cattle as well. I mentioned earlier, importantly, Miller and Lux also sold water to oil companies, and that brought in substantial income from that service. The water came not only from pumping out of Buena Vista Lake Reservoir directly from the Kern River, but also pumping from groundwater. By the early 1900s, Miller and Lux was selling water to over 25 oil companies, and they were storing water in Buena Vista Lake Reservoir, according to testimony in the Title Insurance and Trust Company California Supreme Court decision. Next slide, please. This is a close-up of the southern part of the previous map, and on here you can see the various features that Miller and Lux had built in conjunction with the upstream parties in Lux v. Hagen. Those include, those features were serving the West Side Canal, the East Side Canal, and you can also see the main drain, which was formerly had been Buena Vista Slough. You can see Buena Vista Lake Reservoir with the East Levee holding back water from flowing toward the Maple service area. Next slide, please. This is another map from the 1919 Lippincott and Means report, and it shows the Buttonwillow service area's many laterals between the East Side Canal and the West Side Canal, and also the laterals in the future Maple service area, just to the east of the Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. The map also indicates that there were many wells in the vicinity. Those are small dots. It's hard to read on this particular map, but they were shown there. Next slide, please. So beginning in the teens, Miller and Lux decided to start selling their real estate in the southern San Joaquin Valley for a variety of reasons. And in about the same time, in the early 20s, California developed what became known as the California State Water Plan. This should not be confused with the State Water Project, which was the California Aqueduct, which was built in the 1960s and 1970s. State Water Plan, on the other hand, was set forth in California Department of Engineering's Bulletin Number 9. which was published in 1920. And the state water plan essentially called for water districts to be organized all over the Central Valley of California. The districts would then contract with the state of California to build the state water plan, which included gigantic canals in the Central Valley and storage reservoir and the rivers coming out of the Sierra Nevada. And Miller and Lux saw the state water plan as beneficial to them. They thought that this would be useful in their plan to sell their real estate. And so they proposed the Buena Vista Water Storage District to take advantage of the state water plan. They formally had been involved in trying to form a much larger water district, which was called the Kern River Water Storage District for all lands at First and Second Point, but Miller and Lux decided to pull out of that because they didn't like the interaction with First Point water users, so as a result, Miller and Lux decided to form their own water district. The map illustrates items that Miller and Lux intended to transfer to this new proposed Buena Vista Water Storage District. And that included the West Side Canal, the East Side Canal, and the main drain, the North and Coles Levee, which again channeled the Kern River into Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. You can also see the inlet and outlet canals that were going to be transferred, and you can see the East Levee that helped turn Buena Vista Lake into a more useful reservoir. Next slide, please. The proposed district that Miller and Lux was hoping to organize actually went through two phases. The map on the left shows the original idea in 1922 for the Buena Vista Water Storage District. And that included not only the turquoise areas and the red areas and the gray area, but also Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. The map on the right shows the way the district was organized after the 1922 plan was not approved by the California State Engineer. The California State Engineer's office believed that the 1922 proposition, which covered 125,000 acres, was too ambitious and would not provide adequate water for the area involved in order to pay off bonds that would that would be used to pay for construction. As a result, the district was scaled back to what you see on the right here. The diagonal shaded areas are the areas that were removed from the original proposition. The red lands, I might add here, are lands that were proposed to be within the district but were not owned by Miller and Lux. Those were the ones at the north were owned by Frederick Cox, whose successor, Title Insurance and Trust Company, was involved in that famous water lawsuit. The red lands more to the south were owned by Stebbins, and I can't remember the other person's name. Next slide, please. As I said, bonds were going to be used to purchase Miller and Lux's structures for the Buena Vista Water Storage District. And as a result, Miller and Lux in the future district hired W.C. Hammett to make an estimate of the costs of these features. Hammett made this map showing what would be acquired going into the district. The red lines here were the irrigation canals and laterals. The turquoise lines were drainage canals, and you can see a very large kind of black or brownish line labeled Reclamation Canal on the far left. That was the original West Side Canal, and that was also proposed for inclusion. By this point, it had become a flood channel for excess flows on the Kern River. Next slide, please. In addition to purchasing those items for the future Buena Vista Water Storage District, the district intended to build other items that would be paid for with bonds to make their water supplies more useful. One of the problems with the Kern River below second point of measurement was that there was a lot of seepage loss in that riverbed there. And as a result, the future district proposed building canals that would take the water almost directly from second point of measurement directly to where it would be used. The main canal you can see at the northern edge of your map there diverting from a new diversion weir just below second point of measurement, and that would carry water to the Buttonwillow service area. And you can see the Alejandro Canal, which would carry water not only for the Maple service area, but also for storage into Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about how all of this is going to be financed with bonds. As a result, California State Engineering Office's a guy by the name of Sidney Harding, very famous water engineer, did a report in order to evaluate whether the bond issue was realistic or not. And as part of his report, he examined how much water would be available at second point of measurement for use in Buena Vista Water Storage District. And that report included this table. The table demonstrates that between 1894, which was shortly after most of the facilities required by the 1888 Miller-Hagen Agreement had been constructed, in 1926, just as the district was being organized, shows that there were frequently very large flows of water available at second point of measurement. The table also shows how extremely variable those flows were from year to year. The smallest flows in any given year were in 1924, when there were only a little over 11,000 acre-feet of water available. The largest flows during this period were in 1916, when a little over 600,000 acre-feet were available. And that created an average availability of about 151,000 acre-feet per year. Next slide, please. This is a map in the Miller and Lux collection at the Bancroft Library at the University of California, Berkeley. It illustrates the lands that Miller and Lux had been successful in selling because of all the improvements under the Miller-Hagen Agreement as of roughly 1929 to 1930. The map itself is not dated, but it's approximately that date based on surrounding documents. You can see that the map, it shows the southern part of the Buttonwillow service area, and a very large part of Miller and Lux's lands by this point had been sold to individual small farmers who were now raising their own crops. The red area that you see on the map was apparently added later. I don't know by whom, but you can see in the legend in the upper right-hand corner, the red area indicates lands that that particular person believed would benefit by a pump to lift water into a higher elevation for the East Side Canal. Excuse me. And if we go to the next slide, there's another important point that you can get out of this map. This is a blow-up of the extreme southern part of the previous map. You can see the West Side Canal and the East Side Canal. But the importance of this is that you can see that by this particular point in time, there had been many wells supplementing river flows for the future for the Buena Vista Water Storage District. Many of those wells were right adjacent to either canals or laterals. Those are the blue dots that you see there. There is also a table listing all of these wells. Next slide, please. So I have an epilogue in my full written testimony. The epilogue, like a lot of scholarly works, is intended to show how all of this history is relevant to the present, but without developing a full-blown book or report on the details fitting in between. This is a map from the State Water Resources Control Board's 1964 file for application number 9446. 9446 was an application by the Buena Vista Water Storage District for additional water that might be made available. I should say the application was in the early 1930s, I think, for water that might be available when Isabella Dam would be constructed. And that was part of the State Water Plan of 1920. And other parties also believed that additional water supplies might become available by the construction of Isabella. And what you see on this map are the applications, not only of Buena Vista Water Storage District, which is the red area in the middle with the red text box. but you can see the applications that were filed later up into the 1950s by other parties who also thought there would be extra water available by the construction of Isabella Dam. As a result of studies by the Water Resources Control Board's engineering staff, the Water Resources Control Board decided in the decision 1196 that there were no available extra Kern River waters available for appropriation. And then subsequent order 8925 confirmed that conclusion. Next slide, please. I might point out here as part of this epilogue that it took so long to get to that conclusion because of the fact that there were a lot of things that kept Isabella Dam from being constructed. First of all, the U.S. Army and the Bureau of Reclamation both proposed building Isabella, and there was essentially a pretty big contest between the two of them for many years over which one was going to get the right to build the reservoir. And lots of detail goes into why parties wanted one side or the other. I won't get into that here, but that was one of the reasons why the reservoir wasn't built right away. Also very important is the fact that Isabella wasn't built because first the Great Depression hit right after Buena Vista Water Storage District was created. And that meant that financing wasn't available. And then World War II in the 1940s further delayed construction because the United States directed its efforts toward military wear during that period. Ultimately, the Corps of Engineers completed Isabella in 1953. Even after that point, there were continued delays about whether there was additional available water from the Kern River. Some of that related to parties who wanted storage water for a recreation area, notably Kern County. And then also there were a lot of negotiations that took place about among the parties who wanted the excess water about who would get how much of it. And that's why the decision didn't happen until 1964. Next slide, please. So this is my summary and conclusion. Miller and Lux and their subsidiary company, the Kern Valley Water Company, they were the predecessors of today's Buena Vista Water Storage District. They not only relied upon riparian rights for their claims along the lower area of the San Joaquin Valley, but they also filed 3 appropriative water rights claims in 1877. The 1888 Miller-Hagen Agreement in part grew out of these considerations after the Supreme Court upheld the riparian rights within the state of California. And also the 1888 Miller-Hagen Agreement required structures to make water supplies more usable to the future Buena Vista Water Storage District. As a result of the Miller-Hagen Agreement, the district's predecessors and then the district itself used Kern River water to irrigate a variety of crops, including supplying water to tenant farmers' crops. Obviously, a lot of this went to grains and grass forage, but there were other crops as well, according to the Miller and Lux papers at the Bancroft Library. The improvements under the 1888 Miller-Hagen Agreement also provided better access to drinking water for livestock, recharging groundwater, providing water to many farm homesteads that had been carved out of the original Miller and Lux lands. And also it allowed the district to sell water and Miller and Lux to sell water to oil companies. And that's the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield. I appreciate that. I have one question that I would like to ask now, just because it came to my mind during your presentation. And I'm wondering if, based on your research and your review of these maps and all of this information, obviously you have extensive information, and do you have a sense when the approximate earliest date was when Miller and Lux and the lands associated started using wells as a source of supply?
There's a lot of information in the historical record, initially regarding wells that were being used to supply oil companies.
Okay.
Miller and Lux started supplying oil companies with water in the very early years of the 1900s, around 1902 or thereabouts. They became concerned when oil companies went out into the field and started drilling their own wells for water. And there was a lot of interaction between Miller and Lux and the oil companies in the early years of the teens. So the answer to your question is sometime between roughly 1900 and 1915, 1916 is, and then the subsequent wells for irrigation purposes, those largely came into play a little bit later on, based on what I could see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think at this point, I'll look to see if it makes the most sense. Before Mr. O'Brien, I had turned to you to cross-exam first. I think that still makes sense here unless there are any other proposals. I think with the timing, let's go ahead and get started. If you're prepared, Mr. O'Brien, and then we can take a break in about a half hour or so, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm ready to go.
Please go ahead with your cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Littlefield. Nice to see you again, sir.
Good morning, Mr. O'Brien. Good to see you too.
As you know, I'm representing the Kern Water Bank Authority in this proceeding. I'd like to start with just some very basic geography. I think this won't take long. Ms. Mullen, could you pull up KWBA 003? And for purposes of my examination, Dr. Littlefield, I'm going to refer to the Buena Vista Water Storage District as Buena Vista. Is that acceptable?
That's fine.
You are familiar with the current service area of Buena Vista, correct?
That's correct.
And does this map that we just put up, KWBA 003, accurately reflect the current district service area?
Yeah, I can't speak to the exact number of acres, but the green area is approximately the service area.
Okay. Now, you mentioned in your direct testimony that at some point you were retained by the law firm McMurtry, Hartsock, Worth, and St. Lawrence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When were you first retained by the McMurtry law firm in connection with this State Water Board Kern River proceeding?
I think that was in 2011.
Now I'd like to ask Ms. Mullen to pull up your testimony, which is Buena Vista 600 at PDF page 3. Paragraph 6. And I'd like to focus your attention on question 3. Can you read that question 3 for me?
Sure. Question 3, what is the history of water storage uses for lands that became Buena Vista Water Storage District, including surface storage and groundwater storage?
So is it fair to say that part of the scope of your work in this case involved examining the history of water use for groundwater storage within the current Buena Vista service area?
Correct.
Now I'd like to ask Ms. Mullen to scroll to PDF page 4, please. And I would just to refresh your recollection, ask you to quickly review paragraphs 9 to 12. Those are the ones I'm going to ask you about.
I'm pretty familiar with them. You can go ahead and ask me.
I figured you were. You mentioned in your direct testimony that Swampland District number 121 was I think you used the word direct predecessor of Buena Vista. Is that correct?
Well, through Miller and Lux, yes.
Okay. And you also mentioned that Swampland District number 121 at some point was, I think you used the words, taken over by Miller and Lux.
That's correct. Well, let me qualify that.
Okay.
Miller, what I meant by that is that Miller and Lux acquired most of the land within Swampland District 121.
I see. And do you know when that acquisition occurred approximately?
It was happening right about the time that between when the district was formed in 1870. I think the district was formed in December 1870. And I think by about the time that the water rights filings were made, the water rights filings were made by the district itself. But I think most of Miller and Lux's lands were acquired during this period, certainly before 1879, which is when Lux v. Hagen took place or began.
Is it fair to say, Dr. Littlefield, that Swampland District number 121 was a completely separate and distinct entity from Miller and Lux?
Yes, it was a separate political entity. That's correct.
Okay. Now, turning back to your testimony in paragraph 9, lines 3 and 4, you state, quote, "These claims are now the basis of some of the Buena Vista Water Storage District's water rights," end quote. Do you see that?
I do.
And you've reviewed these 3 water right appropriation notices, I assume?
Yes, I have copies of them.
Is it your understanding that the 3 notices provide evidence of the intent of Swampland District number 121, the predecessor of Miller and Lux, as to the nature and scope of its intended appropriation of Kern River water?
Objection, vague and ambiguous and compound.
Mr. O'Brien, can you break it down, please, for us?
Is it your understanding that the 3 notices, and I can take them one at a time if that's the preference, but let's try it together. Is it your understanding that the 3 notices provide evidence of the intent of Swampland District number 121 as to the scope of its intended appropriation of Kern River water as of the date the notices were filed?
Yes.
Are you aware of any documents in the historical record that indicate any other intent on the part of Swampland District number 121 regarding the scope of the intended appropriation of Kern River water reflected in the 3 notices?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
Well, we have the 3 notices. And what I'm trying to get at is whether in your review of the historical records, you're aware of any document either prepared by or for Swampland District 121 that states any other information regarding the scope of the appropriation of Kern River water that's reflected in the 3 notices.
With regard to the
Objection, vague and ambiguous and compound.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I mean, other than we're talking about the 3 notices at once, I suppose that's compound, but Dr. Littlefield, I think you're very capable. You can qualify your answer, so please go ahead and respond.
If you're asking whether these 3 appropriation notices are the only ones that the district made, as far as I know, that is correct.
Well, my question was a little broader than that. My question is whether, in addition to the 3 notices, there are other documents prepared by or for Swampland District number 121 that you believe are relevant to the intent of that district in terms of the scope of the appropriation of Kern River water.
Yes, I think if you look at the details that I believe are in this full written testimony, as well as what I've set forth in my book, there's a lot of discussion about how the Swampland District went about constructing canals to carry water to the district itself, and how they attempted to do other improvements, and how ultimately the Swampland District's efforts, within a month of the district of the organization, the district turned to another party called the Kern Valley Water Company to handle the construction of those features on behalf of the district. They contracted with the KVWC. To the extent that those are demonstrations of intent, I would say the construction shows that they went about doing the work the best they could to bring these waters to the swampland.
In these other materials you just described, is there any specific reference to the development of groundwater for irrigation purposes within the lands covered by Swampland District number 121?
Not during this
Protection
period.
compound. I don't know how many other documents, and we're looking for specific references.
Mr. O'Brien, for my benefit, can you ask the question again?
Sure. Let me break it down. So, Dr. Littlefield, in response to my previous question about other documents that evidence the intent of Swampland District number 1 regarding the scope of the intended appropriation, you mentioned that there are other historical materials aside from the 3 notices. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have those other historical materials. You have a good working knowledge of those. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And my question to you is whether in any of those historical materials you can recall any specific reference to the development of groundwater for irrigation use within Swampland District number 121.
I think you'd need to qualify that by setting a chronological limit to that question.
Okay, let's set a chronological limit up to the time of the conveyance of the land from Swampland District number 121 to Miller and Lux.
No, I did not see any evidence of development of groundwater during that period.
Thank you. Now back to the 3 notices that are described in your testimony. Do any of the 3 notices specifically mention the use of Kern River water for the purpose of groundwater recharge?
No, they do not.
Do any of the 3 notices even mention groundwater or underground water?
No.
Do any of the 3 notices mention groundwater wells?
They do not.
Do any of the 3 notices mention the concept of conjunctive use in any manner?
You know, I've listened to some of the earlier testimony in this proceeding, and my understanding is conjunctive use is a legal term, and I'm not really familiar with the parameters of that term, so I can't answer your question.
Well, but my question was simply whether the notices specifically refer to the concept of conjunctive use or related concepts that involve the coordinated use of surface water and groundwater?
No, they don't.
Let's turn back to your testimony now. Buena Vista 600. Ms. Mullen, if you could go to PDF page 54. Paragraph 125. I'll just let you take a second and review that, Dr. Littlefield. Now you mentioned in that paragraph 125, you talk about, let me just read the sentence I'm interested in and we'll go from there. And the sentence that starts on line 9, quote, for instance, writing a report in 1916, U.S. Geological Survey engineer W.C. Mendenhall explained the connections between the Kern's flows and groundwater in that region. And then there's a citation to Buena Vista 638, end quote. First of all, I think that was the date that you corrected in your earlier testimony. Is that correct?
Oh, actually, now I see a second mistaken use of. No, the date I corrected is on line 17, and that's with regard to the Lippincott means report.
Okay.
That 1916 should be 1919. But if you look at line 9, which is referring to the Mendenhall report, that 1916 date is correct. That was the date of the Mendenhall report.
Okay, thank you. So there's basically two sources that you've cited for the statements in paragraph 125. There's the Mendenhall report, and there's what you call the Lippincott means report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are there any other sources that you're aware of that support the statements in paragraph 125?
Mendenhall wrote a preliminary report 8 years earlier in 1908. And in that particular report, he also talked about groundwater resources in the lower San Joaquin Valley. And then 8 years later, he wrote the one that I've referenced here. Both of these reports, in my opinion, would have been well known to Miller and Lux's employees because Geological Survey publications were widely circulated among water users all over the country.
You didn't cite the earlier preliminary report, though, in your testimony, correct?
That's correct, but I believe it's in my book.
This earlier, what you call preliminary report, what was the status of that report? Was it ever finalized, or did it essentially become one of these later reports?
My recollection is both of them were U.S. Geological Survey water supply papers. In other words, they were both formally published.
But that's not included in any of the materials you submitted, correct?
Correct.
Sorry, and Mr. Littlefield, did you say it was formerly or formally published?
Was that a question for me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
The question is, did you say it was formerly, meaning before, or formally published?
Maybe somebody else could repeat the question. I still can't hear it.
Dr. Littlefield, I can try. I think the distinction is between the word formerly, as in the past, and the word formally, as in not informal.
It's the latter. They were both formal publications, meaning official publications.
No, that's good. I just wanted the word. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield. That was our court reporter doing her very best. So thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
In Your testimony there in paragraph 126, you cite the Lippincott means report, correct?
That's correct.
And you refer to a table from that report, Buena Vista 639.
Yes.
Ms. Mullen, could we pull up Buena Vista 639, please? And then if you could go to PDF page 89, please, Ms. Mullen. We'll need to rotate that one. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. I know this is a difficult document to decipher. If we could try to blow it up. Thank you. Dr. Littlefield, you're familiar with this document, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know when it was prepared?
Sometime before 1919, it was in the Lippincott means report, which was finalized in 1919. You can take a look at the, Ms. Mullen, if you could go up to the very top of the page, you can see in the column under, it's the, under observed, the sub-column that lists date, that gives the dates when the engineers that compiled this data observed the various wells that are listed here.
Now, there's a number of wells listed on this document, correct?
Yes.
And some of them are listed as irrigation wells, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And others are listed as either domestic or stock watering wells, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any way to determine whether any of these wells listed on this document are located or were located within the current Buena Vista service area?
The only answer I can provide to that is the heading at the top of the table. Under well data, it says observations on wells on and near the Miller and Lux Kern River Ranch. I took that to mean primarily the Buttonwillow service area.
But that could also, the Miller and Lux Kern River Ranch could also include lands, for example, north of Wasco Road. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
So you have no specific understanding of the specific locations of the wells listed on this document?
I do not. That's correct.
And you don't have any specific knowledge as to when any of the wells listed on this document were actually drilled. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, this is at the risk of being perhaps a bit tedious, Dr. Littlefield. I'm going to ask you to go down the column in this document labeled use and count up the number of wells identified as irrigation wells, if you would.
We're going to have to blow this up a little bit bigger for me to do that.
I understand.
Just irrigation?
And
If there's any time the word irrigation is used with respect to a well, let's identify that.
Mr. O'Brien, just for clarification, are you counting in that question the wells that are identified with a line with quotation marks on them in that use?
I'm not sure I understand that question, Mr. Pizzera.
I think
Okay.
I think I can help with that, if I may.
Sure.
The quotation marks are ditto marks. It just basically means carry the whatever the previous item is down to the following line.
Okay, I understand. I just am interested in your best understanding as to the number of wells on this document that were used in whole or in part for irrigation.
Well, if you really want me to count them all, I can. I think I can probably simplify it and say a large number of them were either used purely for irrigation or for irrigation and stock watering.
Well, I'm really interested in a fairly precise number here, Dr. Littlefield, and I realize to some extent the document speaks for itself, but this is frankly a rather difficult document to decipher, and I know you're very familiar with it. So if you'll indulge me, I would like to just quickly go down the list and identify the number of wells that are identified for irrigation use, either exclusively or partially irrigation use.
How do you want me to do that?
Just go down the column labeled use and let's just count them off for me, please.
I'll just read them down line by line, and where there is a ditto mark imposed, I will just simply repeat whatever the previous heading was.
Fair enough.
So starting at the very top line, it's irrigation, then domestic, domestic, domestic. Then there are two blank lines, then another domestic, then irrigation and stock, irrigation and stock, then domestic, domestic, irrigation and stock, irrigation, abandoned, abandoned, irrigation, 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 irrigation and stock, irrigation and stock, irrigation and stock, irrigation and stock, irrigation and stock. We are now down to, I think it's line 222 for clarity. That line is labeled stock, and it's followed by irrigation, stock, and domestic. The next two entries are the same. Then the next entry is domestic and stock. Then the next entry is domestic and stock and irrigation. Then abandoned, stock, electric meter, it looks like on the next line. Then irrigation, followed by irrigation. And if we could scroll up to get beyond line 223, maybe we stop. We don't want to go too far here. Okay, let's see, irrigation, stock, and domestic, two more, domestic and stock, domestic and irrigation, abandoned, stock, electric meter. I'm not sure if I did those already or not, but I'll keep going. Irrigation, irrigation, stock, irrigation, 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 abandoned, stock and irrigation, 5 more of those, then stock with 3 more of those, then a blank line, then 2 of irrigation, then abandoned, then 6 stock, then domestic and stock, 2 of those. Looks like the next one is domestic irrigation in stock. And if we could cursor up again, we're on line 265 there. Okay, stop. So we just did 265, so 266 would be stock, another stock, domestic irrigation in stock, domestic stock, domestic irrigation in stock, 2 more of those, then domestic and stock, then stock, domestic and irrigation, and the last entry, which is number 310, is stock.
Thank you for indulging me with that, Dr. Littlefield. I felt it was important that we have a clear statement on the record. Now, some of the, let's strike that. Let me back up. So if you look up at the top columns on this document, column names, I believe there's an entry relating to water quality.
I don't see an entry for quality, Mr. O'Brien. I see an entry for quantity. Is that the column you're referring to?
No, I thought there were some notations on the document relating to quality in terms of poor. There it is. Yeah.
Yes, I see. There's a column. Could you cursor a little bit more to the left? It's the, oops, and back up to the top. Yeah, there's a column labeled quality, which is just to the left of the column labeled remarks.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you to go through that whole column, Dr. Littlefield, but I do see that there are some notations for wells that have water quality that's either characterized as bad or poor or fair or good. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Just so the record is clear on this, what is your understanding of the term stock watering as it's used in this context, or stock?
The only thing I can think of is in terms of common sense would be a well that would provide water into a small depression for cattle or into some sort of artificial basin like a tub or something like that. I don't know, though. I would leave that to the farming experts.
Okay. And same question for the term domestic as it's used in this document. Do you have an understanding as to that term?
Yeah, I think that would mean water that was used in farmhouses or buildings by people, in some cases being used by oil companies for their personnel in the field for bathing and drinking and cooking and so forth.
Now there is the column that you pointed out with the word quantity. Can you, from this document, determine the amount of water that was used in any particular time period from any of these wells?
You mean how much was used over what period of time?
Yes, over a specific period of time.
the only thing I can answer to that is the document says what it says. I can't clarify beyond that.
Okay, fair enough.
I could add there's some of these are references to flowing in inches. I take that to mean miners inches.
Thank you. I've got just a few more questions in this line, Ms. Kinsey, and then I think that would be a good time to break if you'd like.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you. Dr. Littlefield, are you aware of any documentary evidence that demonstrates clearly and unequivocally that Miller and Lux, prior to December 19th, 1914, was operating with the deliberate intent to store Kern River water underground?
Objection, vague and ambiguous as to clearly, unequivocally, and deliberately.
Sustained. I think that's a fair objection.
Dr. Littlefield, are you aware of any documentary evidence which demonstrates an intent by Miller and Lux prior to December 19, 1914, to utilize Kern River water for purposes of storage underground?
Objection, vague and ambiguous as to intent before December 19th, 1914. Dr. Miltenberger used a 1921 report to express his opinion on the matter.
I don't think.
May I respond, Ms. Kinsey?
Sure, please.
First of all, we're talking about Dr. Littlefield here and not Dr. Miltenberger. Dr. Littlefield is an expert on the Kern River. He's written books on the subject. I'm simply trying to understand whether he's aware of any documentary evidence of the intent that I described during the time frame I described. And I think I'm entitled to identify the timeframes for purposes of my questions. If Mr. Pizzaro wants to ask Dr. Littlefield about other timeframes, that's certainly his prerogative.
And I think that is also fair. So objection overruled.
Would you like your answer now?
Yes, I would.
Miller and Lux, as I point out in my written testimony and also in my book in some depth, Miller and Lux was quite concerned pre-1914, and by that I mean December 19th, 1914, quite concerned when oil companies began drilling wells because those wells took groundwater. And in a number of instances, Miller and Lux complained to the oil companies that in effect they were taking groundwater that Miller and Lux felt was available for their use. And therefore they didn't want the oil companies to do that without Miller and Lux's approval and I might add payment.
I'm going to move to strike that as non-responsive, Ms. Kinsey. I really was asking for documentary evidence of an intent to use Kern River water for underground storage, and the answer went to use of water by oil companies and didn't really focus on the documentary evidence aspect of my question.
I'm sure I'll strike the testimony because I do think it's non-responsive, although I suspect I'm not sure these motions to strike it's going to come in eventually, but we'll strike it and try again for a very narrow and specific response to Mr. O'Brien's question, Dr. Littlefield.
The answer is no.
Thank you. I think we can take our break now, Ms. Kinsey.
Thank you. It is 10:21. Let's go ahead and take a break until 10:35, and then we'll return. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and resume as soon as I see Dr. Littlefield has rejoined us. And there we have it. So I see Dr. Littlefield, Mr. O'Brien, and Mr. Becerra are all here. So let's go ahead and go back on the record. Mr. O'Brien, I will turn things back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. Ms. Mullen, if I could ask you to pull up Dr. Littlefield's testimony again, Buena Vista 600 at PDF page 81. And we'll be looking at paragraph 160. Oops, I think I got the wrong. Let's see, hold on. Okay, yeah, it's 160. There we go. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. So Dr. Littlefield, in this paragraph, you discuss a report that you refer to, or you said became known as the Hyatt Report. Is that correct?
Yes,
This is always confusing to me because the Hyatt Report was actually prepared by someone named Hammett, correct?
Hammett did some of the, some pieces of the report, is my understanding.
Okay. And you describe this report, you say there in lines 21 and 22 that this report became the model for completing the district's organization and beginning its operations, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, if you, Ms. Mullen, if you could pull up Buena Vista 663, please. And we'll go to PDF page 10. If we could scroll down to the bottom of that page, there's a table. There it is. Perfect. So I'd like you to read the text under the heading water supply under that paragraph. In fact, I'll just read it into the record, Dr. Littlefield, so we have some clarity. It says, quote, the amount of second point water available during a cycle of years similar to those of the period of record from 1894 to 1926, inclusive under the Miller-Hagen Agreement, would be as follows, end quote. And then we'll scroll over to the next page, PDF page 11. And there's a table shown there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this table reflects what the authors of the Hyatt Report consider to be the amount of second point water available during the period 1894 to 1926. Is that correct?
I believe that's what it said on the previous page.
This table does not show the amount of second point water that was beneficially used during that period 1894 to 1926, correct?
That's correct.
And then below the table, we may have to scroll down a bit. Yes. The authors of the Hyatt Report, and I'll just quote this sentence, states, quote, while the mean available for the 33-year period amounts to 151,251 acre feet, This is made up partly by 3 excessive years, 1906, 1909, and 1916, when the amount available would have greatly exceeded the needs of the district and a large amount would have been wasted, period, end quote. My first question, Dr. Littlefield, is how do you understand the use of the term wasted in that sentence as used by the authors of this report?
Well, this was pre-construction of Isabella, which meant that the only storage reservoir on the system at the time would have been Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. And I don't know exactly what they were saying, but I believe, based on some of the testimony in the title insurance and trust case, that when it says would have been wasted, what that probably means is that the water would have flown past the district northward toward Tulare Lake, either into the Miller and Lux lands north of Wasco Road or all the way to Tulare Lake itself.
Do you happen to know what the hydrologic conditions on the Kern River were in 1906, 1909, and 1916?
I don't know anything about hydrologic conditions.
So you don't know, for example, whether there was flooding in any of those years on the Kern River system?
No, I don't.
Now there is reference, we may have to scroll up again. Let's go back to your testimony just to walk through this slowly. In Buena Vista 600, and we're at PDF page 81, Ms. Mullen, paragraph 162. Thank you. And you discussed the fact that the Hyatt report discussed 4 geographic areas to be included within Buena Vista and their main water features. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we could scroll down to paragraph 166. That refers to the area north of Wasco Road, and that paragraph indicates that this 4th parcel, according to the Hyatt report, consisted of 2,720 non-contiguous acres. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
So for purposes of the Hyatt report's analysis, were the authors of that report assuming that this area north of Wasco Road would be included within Buena Vista? Let me rephrase that. It wasn't a very good question. The purpose of the Hyatt report was really to do what, Dr. Littlefield?
It was to set out the details that had been approved by California State Engineer Hyatt for the organization of the Buena Vista Water Storage District. And it was all the details about where the district would be and so forth.
Okay. And as of the time of the Hyatt report, was it contemplated by the authors of that report that the area north of Wasco Road would be included within Buena Vista?
Yes.
Okay. But those 2,720 acres north of Wasco Road were ultimately not included. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know the reason for the exclusion of those lands?
No, I do not.
And Ms. Mullen, if you could pull up Buena Vista 644. This is an excerpt from bulletin number 9 that you included with your exhibits. Is that correct, Dr. Littlefield?
That's correct.
If we could scroll, Ms. Mullen, to the top of PDF page 3, please. Dr. Littlefield, could you read into the record that first sentence that appears at the top of PDF page 3, which is page 53 of Bulletin 9?
The sentence that begins with, "There have been only."
Yes.
There have been only 3 years in which the discharge has been sufficient to furnish over 300,000 acre feet at Second Point, and runoff above this amount is of too uncertain occurrence to be considered as a part of a dependable supply.
And that was one of the conclusions of the authors of Bulletin 9, is that correct?
Yes,
Do you consider Bulletin 9 to be a reliable source document?
yes.
Are you aware of any historical documents prepared at or prior to the time of Bulletin 9 that indicate that there was a dependable supply of 500,000 acre feet or more of the Kern River at Second Point?
At the time of Bulletin 9,
Objection, it's vague and ambiguous as to dependable.
I overruled. Let's caveat the question that the term dependable, as it's used as in accordance with Dr. Littlefield's understanding of the term used here in Bulletin 9.
Yes, thank you.
Please answer the question if you remember it, Dr. Littlefield.
could you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. Are you aware of any document in the historical record that was prepared at or before the time of preparation of Bulletin 9 that indicates that there was a dependable supply of Kern River water of 500,000 acre feet or more at Second Point?
Objection, again, as to dependable, we've had a lot of discussion about evaporation from Buena Vista Lake. I don't know whether a dependable supply includes evaporation off of the lake.
Well, okay, let me try again with it. And Mr. O'Brien, you can try another question after me, but maybe I might turn to you to ask the question, but to phrase it. But I think to some extent, there's just a question whether any other documents discuss the phrase dependable supply, just that phrase in and of itself. So not interpreting the phrase in any way, so maybe Mr. O'Brien, would you humor me and ask that question? And then you can go from there. Because I'm not sure I can put it together in my head. You have notes on.
I understand where you're going, Ms. Kinsey. I guess I don't want to make my question so narrow that it fails to have its intended effect. Because so let me try here.
Okay.
Dr. Littlefield, are you aware of any documents in the historical record prepared at or prior to the time of Bulletin 9 that discuss the dependable supply of the Kern River at Second Point?
That's a really broad question to attempt to answer. The Miller and Lux papers by themselves at the Bancroft Library are characterized by the archivist there in what are known as linear feet, which is to take all of the manila folders and all of the banker's boxes, and if you stack them all side by side, it would, according to the archivist, the total linear feet is more than 1/5 of a mile of Miller and Lux records, which include a lot of documents about supply of water. And that's just Miller and Lux. Then you get into all the documents that are in the state archives as well. So the short answer is there is so much material that I can't remember if there was anything of that nature.
Okay. Let's narrow my question a bit then to technical documents or technical reports prepared by the state of California, similar to Bulletin 9. And remembering that you are an expert on the Kern River and its historical documents, are you aware of any such documents prepared by the state of California that discuss the quote, dependable supply quote of the Kern River at Second Point?
Again, I'd have to give you the same answer. It's just too much material to try and remember.
So you can't identify any particular document as you sit here?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Mullen, if you could return to Dr. Littlefield's testimony, Buena Vista 600, PDF page 79. Paragraph 158. And just to refresh your recollection, Dr. Littlefield, if you could read the first 2 sentences of paragraph 158.
Out loud?
You could read this one to yourself, please.
All right. Okay.
Now, just so we're all together on this, this relates to a quitclaim deed, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that quitclaim deed, the first party, so-called first party, is Miller and Lux, correct?
Yes,
And Buena Vista is the second party, is that correct?
correct.
And it's your testimony in paragraph 158 that Miller and Lux transferred its Second Point right to Buena Vista on the condition that Buena Vista deliver water to the lands of Miller and Lux and its successors within Buena Vista, correct?
Yes.
Let's move now to paragraph 159 of your testimony. If you could read the first sentence to yourself.
Okay.
So it's your testimony that the quitclaim deed that we're discussing provided that lands within Buena Vista's boundaries were to have what you call a preferential right to the use of the water, that Miller and Lux's lands north of Wasco Road were only to receive water when Buena Vista's lands had been satisfied. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Does the quitclaim deed use the term preferential right anywhere?
I believe I quoted the relevant language here. Take me a second to skim it to see if it's used. I can tell you that normally my writing style is to try and summarize. So the The preferential right is probably my summary of what the actual language in the deed said.
Okay. And you're not qualified to give a legal opinion regarding the deed, correct?
That's right.
Now, based on the language that you quoted there in paragraph 159 of your testimony, one of the ways that Buena Vista could satisfy its obligations under the deed was to fill what are called such storage reservoirs as the district may provide. Is that what the deed language says?
Ms. Kinsey, I'd like to request we pull the actual deed up. I believe it's one of the Water Bank's exhibits.
Well, he's quoted, I think, the pertinent language of the deed in his testimony. I'm happy to take the time to do that, but I think what we need to be talking about is right there in his testimony. So I'll leave that up to you, Ms. Kinsey.
And I don't disagree, but for my own benefit, let's go ahead and look at the deed, but I think we're going to have to identify obviously the exhibit number. If either Mr. Becerra, it looks like you're looking for it, or Mr. O'Brien, do you know the KWBA exhibit number? I think it's worthwhile for us to look at it.
I can take a moment and find it.
Great.
I think it, is it Buena Vista 661, Ryan?
Oh, I have it as KWBA 17.
Okay, that's fine.
And luckily it is not handwritten.
I appreciate that. Otherwise, it may not be worthwhile for us to look at the actual deed.
That was part of my thinking, is we had it not clean typing, but I understand Mr. Becerra's point.
I'm sorry, Mr. Becerra, can you repeat what you thought the KWBA exhibit number was?
17.
17. KWBA 17. I'm looking, Ms. Mullen is doing excellent work, but trying to keep up with us.
Okay, we have, thank you, Ms. Mullen. We have the quitclaim deed before us, Dr. Littlefield, and I think if Ms. Mullen could scroll down a little bit. I believe that operative language is there in paragraph 3. Is that correct, Dr. Littlefield?
Yeah, I can read it.
Okay.
It's exactly the same as what's in my testimony.
Okay, I thought it would be. My question, sir, involves the reference to the words, quote, such storage reservoirs, quote. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Do you have any understanding, not by way of a legal opinion, but just by way of your work as an historian, as to what the parties to this instrument meant by the term such storage reservoirs?
At this particular point in time, which was, I think, 1927, it would have been twofold. One is Buena Vista Lake Reservoir, which was already in existence as a storage reservoir. And because of California Bulletin Number 9, had discussed the possibility of a storage reservoir in the Sierra Nevada that later became Isabella. I believe this deed would have also contemplated that, but at this point there weren't specific details about who or how or what Isabella would encompass, and that's why the language is left somewhat ambiguous.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, we can turn to a new topic now. I'd like to pull up, and Ms. Tokar may have to help me with an exhibit number here. I believe we marked Buena Vista's opening brief as an exhibit for purposes of cross-examination. Ms. Tokar, do you have that exhibit number?
It should be KWBA 417, and it was uploaded to KWBA's FTP site this morning.
Okay, thank you. So Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up KWBA 417. And I believe we want to go to PDF page 13. This sentence I'm interested in, Dr. Littlefield, starts on line 13. I'll just read it to you. It says, quote, "The Hyatt report described how Buena Vista planned to use and improve these facilities in exercising the second point right up to its maximum allocation to that date, which was 603,588 acre feet in 1916. You see that?
I do.
Now, Ms. Mullen, I'd like for you to pull up, if you would, Buena Vista 663. And we'll go to PDF page 43. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. You're a wizard. That would have taken me 10 minutes to do. So, Dr. Littlefield, this document is what?
I haven't got the foggiest idea.
Okay. Well, it is one of the Buena Vista documents, Buena Vista exhibits, 663. And you'll see that looking at the left side of this document, you'll see different years, and one of the years mentioned is 1916. You see that?
Yeah, it's kind of cut off on the far left there.
I'll tell you what, before I ask you my question, I want to make sure you know what this document is. So, Ms. Mullen, could you go to page 1 of the PDF just so we can make sure Dr. Littlefield knows what we're speaking from?
Yeah, this is the Hyatt report.
Okay, so you're familiar with this document?
Yes.
Okay, so if we could switch back to the previous page, Ms. Mullen. So in looking at the row for 2016. If you look, if you could scroll up,
1916, you mean?
I'm sorry, 1916. Ms. Bowen, if you could just scroll up a bit. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. You'll see, if I could just take a second to get oriented here. Okay, so under 1916, the far left column, the totaled number at the bottom is 603,588. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's the same number that we just saw that was included in Buena Vista's opening brief, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And what's your understanding as to what that number represents?
Objection vague and ambiguous. The number appears a couple of times in this document, this table, and then the previous table. And I believe the document has different sections.
Well, and I don't know, maybe Mr. O'Brien, can we look up, at least, I don't know what the headings are. We can't see right now the headings on the table. So maybe let's first scroll up and orient ourselves to what, if there are any, maybe there aren't headings. Maybe that's why I didn't notice them. But there are. Look at that.
Good idea. Good idea. Thank you. So that particular column is labeled second point water. Is that correct, Dr. Littlefield?
Yes. Yes.
So if you know, do you have any understanding of what the number 603,588 represents for 1916 in that column labeled second point water?
I think I'd have to go back into the text of the report to find it. I'm not trying to be evasive here, but it seems to me that it probably could mean one or two things. It could either mean how much water reached second point or how much water was actually used beyond second point. In other words, available versus used. But without going back into the text of the report and reading the discussion, I can't answer your question.
Okay, fair enough. So Ms. Bowen, if we could keep the view of the top columns and then scroll to the right, please. The column at the far right, I believe says waste. Is that your reading of that column?
Yeah, it looks like it's missing a W, but I think that's right.
And if you look at, again, 1916, and you look at the total number under that column waste, you see the number 110,025. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any understanding as to what that number I just referred to represents?
Again, without going back into the text, I couldn't give you a specific answer.
We talked earlier about use of the term waste in one of the other engineering reports. Do you have any understanding, based on your many years of historical research, on how the term waste was typically used in the engineering community around the time of the Hyatt report?
You mean in the engineering community covering the whole United States, or are we talking the Kern River? Or
Well, let's say in California.
no, I don't.
How about the Kern River?
Again, same answer.
Okay. So you've never, in your historical research, on the Kern River, you've never seen the term waste as used as a synonym for the term surplus?
I've seen it used in the context as that we discussed earlier about water that went past either Swampland District 121 or the Buena Vista Water Storage District later, and ultimately reached areas north of Wasco Road or went to Tulare Lake.
So basically water that wasn't used.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Ms. Mullen, could I take about a 5-minute break here?
That's Dr. Littlefield, of course.
I'm
Let's-
sorry.
It's fine. Ms. Mullen is more important than I am at this point. Certainly, let's do it. We can do it 8 minutes. Let's return at 11:20.
Ms. Kinsey, a request, if no other party has crossed, then I think it would be me on direct. So I'd like to ask for 15 minutes.
15 minutes, that's
Yeah,
fine with me.
redirect.
So we'll just make it around 11:30. We'll reconvene.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's 11:30. Let's go back on the record. At this point, I'll look to the room to see if any other party has questions on cross-examination for Dr. Littlefield. Sounds like the answer is no, hearing none. So I will look to you, Mr. Becerra. Do you have redirect for Dr. Littlefield?
We do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Ms. Mullen, could you please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 639? And could we please go to the first PDF page? So Dr. Littlefield, just to establish what we're looking at, what are the J.B. Lippincott papers?
Joseph B. Lippincott was a water engineer in the early part of the 20th century. Very, very famous water engineer, probably best known for having worked on the Los Angeles Aqueduct and also San Francisco's Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. But he did consulting projects all over the western part of the United States. And his papers, his engineering papers, including a lot of his notes and reports that he did, are at the Water Resources Center archives at the University of California at Riverside, which I spent a lot of time in.
Ms. Mullen, could we please scroll down to the next page, PDF page 2? So Dr. Littlefield, does this label essentially summarize what you just said about the UC Riverside collections?
Yes, that's my handwriting. They wanted, when we took digital photographs of the collection, they wanted this slip of paper to appear in each image.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please go to PDF page 89 in this document? Dr. Littlefield, do you recognize this as the page about which there was some cross-examination?
Yes, and as I said, I made the image with my digital camera.
Okay. Ms. Mullen, can we blow it up so that we can see the headings on the tops of the columns? Oh, a little bit too far, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. Dr. Littlefield, do you see the column heading location?
I do.
And then there are 3 subheadings underneath that. Do you see that?
I do.
What do you understand those subheadings to mean?
Those are the township range and section numbers where the wells were located that are listed in this table.
And to the best of your knowledge, are those township range and section numbers still used by the U.S. Geological Survey to identify the locations of lands?
Yes.
Is it possible using the township range and section information to identify where all of the wells listed on this page were located?
Yes, it would tell you within which section, but not necessarily exactly within that section the well was located.
And a section is usually a square mile of 640 acres. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Could we please scroll down to the bottom of this page, Ms. Mullen? Thank you very much. Dr. Littlefield, do you see the next to last entry there that has a bracket?
Yeah, Ms. Mullen, could you blow that up a little bit for me, please? Yes, I see it.
And do you see that the bracketed numbers are 278 through 309 inclusive?
Yes, could you scroll a little further to the left, or to the right, rather? Right, do you want me to identify the heading for those numbers?
Do you mean the column heading?
The owner of the well.
Well, first, just 278 through 309 would identify that as 32 wells. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And who owned those 32 wells?
It says Kern CL Co. That would stand for the Kern County Land Company, and Miller and Lux.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we scroll over? I believe it's covered by my Zoom box. Actually, maybe we don't have to scroll over. I just need to move my Zoom box. Do you see for those wells, Dr. Littlefield, the next to last column on the screen that has DOM and IRR?
Yes, I do.
What would you understand DOM and IRR to mean?
That would be the purpose of the well, domestic and irrigation.
Is it your understanding that the purpose of those 32 wells included irrigation?
Yes,
And their owners were Kern County Land Company and Miller and Lux. Is that accurate?
that's
Best of
correct.
knowledge? Do you see just to the right of the words Miller and Lux, it says see map number 2?
I see that, yes.
Do you know what map number 2 is?
There were a number of maps this is from the 1919 Lippincott Means Report, as I pointed out earlier. There were a number of wells that were in that particular report, and it's probably one of those one of those maps.
Ms. Mullen, could we please pull up exhibit Buena Vista 640? Dr. Littlefield, do you understand Buena Vista exhibit 640 to be the map number 2 we were just discussing?
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, I see right in the legend in the lower left corner, it says map number 2.
And Ms. Mullen, could we please expand onto that legend? Thank you. So in the legend, Dr. Littlefield, do you see where it indicates that it was from the engineering offices of J.B. Lippincott?
Yes,
And so this map is from Mr. Lippincott's 1919 study. Is that accurate?
yes, and it's probably the map number 2 that was listed on the table.
And have you used this map to depict the location of what is now Buena Vista Water Storage District?
Correct.
And can you just explain briefly what portion of this map depicts the current Buena Vista Water Storage District?
Well, you can see toward now that we're zoomed in a little bit, you can see Wasco Road there, basically at the base of the light green area and just slightly above where the yellow and light blue area begins. And the Button Willow service area would have been what's colored either yellow or light blue. You can also see on the right-hand side, just below the word Button Willow, the East Side Canal, the heading for the East Side Canal, and it's not very clear, but you can also see same thing for the West Side Canal, just on the left of the yellow. So that would be the Button Willow service area of the future Buena Vista Water Storage District. And then just to the right of Buena Vista Lake, you can see the future service area of the Maple service area.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, do you see, I'd like to drill down on the portion of the green and yellow just to the left of the word Button Willow. And can you expand it to about, there you go. And can you, we're going to need to expand it rather far. Can you expand it to, I think, about 400%? It begins to become hard to make out, but Dr. Littlefield, do you see that there's a number of dots associated with 3-digit numbers?
Yes,
No,
those are wells.
Would you understand that to be the numbers of the wells on that table we've discussed?
Correct.
And just for clarity, that table we've discussed is in Exhibit Buena Vista 639, correct?
Yes.
And that Buena Vista 639 is a collection of field notes by Mr. Lippincott to support his 1919 report. Is that accurate?
The 639 includes those field notes, yes.
And do those field notes contain information about the individual wells?
I haven't looked at them in a long time, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did.
Thank you very much. Can we please, Ms. Mullen, can we please go to Exhibit Buena Vista 663 and PDF page 43? Yes, precisely. And Dr. Littlefield, I want to ask you some questions about the line for 1916. You see that?
I do.
Mr. O'Brien asked you a number of questions about the number in the column headed waste. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And do you see that it was 110,000 acre feet?
Yes, a little more than that.
And then going back to the left to the column second point water, 603,588. You see that?
Yes.
I'm just simple math. If you subtracted 110,000 acre feet from 603,000 acre feet, that would be approximately 493,000 acre feet. Is that accurate?
Yes.
To the best of your understanding, is if you let me go back. If you assume that waste was water that was unusable to Buena Vista Water Storage District as of 1916, would the remaining projected usage be approximately 493,000 acre feet?
Objection, lack of foundation. I think we're getting into an engineering opinion here. I mean, if all we're doing is looking at numbers on the document, that's one thing, but I think we're now moving into water usage.
I think I'll sustain the objection. I think, Mr. Becerra, maybe there's a way to ask this, but I do think the particular question you phrased does ask for some kind of engineering conclusion, which is not within Dr. Littlefield's expertise. So
Understood. I'll give it another try. Dr. Littlefield, assuming that the number in the column headed waste was unusable water, if you subtracted 110,000 acre feet from the 603,000 acre foot number in the column second point water, would you get approximately 493,000 acre feet?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all the redirect we have, Ms. Kinsey.
thank you. With that, Mr. O'Brien, do you have any recross based on that redirect?
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I think then I can thank you, Dr. Littlefield, for joining us today. I appreciate very much your testimony and your taking the time to be with us. And I will turn to you, Mr. Becerra. I think it'd be appropriate. Well, let's talk about timing. How long do you think for your next witness? I don't have the list in front of me. How long do you think you would need to present a summary of the written testimony? For Dr. Miller, I have down.
It's about 20 minutes.
Okay, so if it sounds good to you, I think what we should do is go ahead and hear from Dr. Miller, and then we'll pick up with cross-examination after the lunch break. Does that suit everyone?
Yeah, could I have a break of 5 minutes or so just for people to move around?
Yes, of course. We'll return at 11:50.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield.
Thank you.
Could I ask the witness for the spelling of that Indian name he threw out there?
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Well, Dr. Littlefield may no longer be with us, but maybe we can try Mr. Becerra. But do you have anything more specific to orient us?
No, I mean, he just threw it out really fast and I couldn't really even discern it.
I'm not sure the context.
He was just citing something. I don't remember exactly.
Ms. Lagarini, could you repeat the text where the word appeared, and maybe I can help?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I've written 100 pages. I don't know where it is. He only said one word like that, and I can look up any word as long as I could understand the pronunciation, but he just said it too fast. Maybe I'll listen to the recording. I know this is live somewhere on a site, so I'll just listen to it there. Never mind.
Okay. It is. It's on the AHO YouTube
Okay.
channel, which you can find. But if you need assistance finding it, certainly you can email our office and we can send you a link.
Yeah, they sent me a link. I just
Okay,
haven't
good.
listened to it.
Yep. As soon as I see that Dr. Miller is on the screen, we can go ahead and proceed.
Could we may be having a bit of a technical difficulty.
Right.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure.
Ms. Kinsey, does this go on to Tuesday, right?
Yes, it does.
And then you were saying something about the first day it picking up again in June or something?
Yes, we have rebuttal in this proceeding scheduled for June. I don't have the next date
Okay,
off the top of my head, but it's
Okay.
later in June,
later in June, like more towards middle towards end.
middle towards the end, yes.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
My staff informs me June 20th is when we pick up again.
Thank you. That helps.
All right. I see Dr. Miller. Good, wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
I think it is almost still morning, so I'll say good morning, Dr. Miller. And,
Very well. Good morning to you.
and thank you for joining us. If you would please raise your right hand and I will administer the oath. Dr. Miller, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Becerra, you may proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. Ms. Mullen, can we please bring up exhibit Buena Vista 402? Thank you. Dr. Miller, can you please state your name for the record?
David Miller.
Is exhibit Buena Vista 400 your written testimony in this hearing?
Yes.
Is exhibit Buena Vista 401 a statement of your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
Does it accurately state your qualifications?
Yes, it does.
And what is your occupation?
I'm an agricultural engineer.
Is exhibit Buena Vista 402 a summary of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
And are exhibits Buena Vista 403 through 416 the exhibits to your written testimony?
Yes, they are.
Using exhibit Buena Vista 402, please provide a summary of your testimony.
Very good. Could you advance to the next slide? Good. First of all, a few definitions. My testimony is really focused on the GSP prepared for Buena Vista, and that GSP focused on the Button Willow service area. So when I use terms like Buena Vista or the district or growers, all of those are in the context of that service area. So they're all related to that service area, not the Maple service area, for example. In my testimony, I'll describe the distinct physical characteristics of the Button Willow service area, and they really provide the stage on which many of the water use, land use discussions that have been entered into the hearing up to this point are set. And they also are the stage for the water management practices and for the conjunctive management practices that Buena Vista exercises. So in my testimony, I'll describe these distinct physical characteristics and how they shape that stage, and then proceed to describe how they have been employed by the district and by growers really to exercise conjunctive management in the area. Now, a continual challenge facing the district has been to, in looking at the distribution of flows in the Kern River over its history, as we've seen in other exhibits, how to make effective use of years when there are high flows to provide a sustainable water management setting for water users so that they have sustainable water use or access to water during both years when water is diverted with high flows and during other years when water supplies are insufficient to meet demands.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Dr. Miller, I'm sorry to interrupt. Ms. Kinsey, I was just wondering if I could have a continuing objection on relevance grounds. As you know, we filed a motion in limine, which I understand you denied, but I want to make sure for the record that my continuing objection to this testimony on relevance grounds is noted.
And I note your continuing objection, Mr. O'Brien. Thank you for doing that up front.
Thank you.
I apologize for the interruption. Dr. Miller, you may proceed.
That's fine. So I'll describe how Buena Vista has in recent years really modified some of their facilities and practices to take advantage or to make good use of the setting in which they lie, to modify their conjunctive management practices, but to support their continued program of diverting high flows and putting them to good use to support district water users during years of low flow. Next slide, please. I'll take a shortcut through this slide, but I am an agricultural engineer. I've worked at GEI Consultants since 2004, and as the lead consultant on Buena Vista's GSP, I'll be describing the benefits of high flow diversions in terms of sustainable management of groundwater and of agriculture within Buena Vista. Next slide, please. All right. I believe this slide has been shown before, but it illustrates one of the key distinct features of the Button Willow service area, which is that the boundaries of the service area really match the boundaries or the location of these deposits of clay soils, which are highly impermeable and really affect how water is managed in the districts, the cropping that can be done in the districts. And something that's not displayed on this figure is that these uh, impermeable surface soils, or relatively impermeable surface soils, are overlie much more permeable strata. So facilities like district canals and recharge ponds are really very effective recharge mechanisms because they are excavated through the surface soils. And the surface soils are, say, 36 to 45 inches deep. And so they are, so while recharge simply by applying water on the ground surface is not effective, recharge by running water through canals or excavated recharge basins is effective. Next slide, please. Now, another kind of factor in the distinctive nature of the Buttonwillow service area is the prominence of the E-clay under that area. And the E-clay is a very extensive feature, but in Buttonwillow, it is consolidated, so it really is a barrier to groundwater movement, and really separates the upper aquifer, the production aquifer that Buena Vista relies on, from the aquifer under the E-clay. In addition, the E-clay is at a depth that there's really quite a bit of, several hundred feet of aquifer material above the E-clay, so it provides a reliable large reservoir for groundwater users, providing that water levels are maintained in that upper reservoir. Okay, next slide, please. In addition to the E-clay, which is a barrier that really prevents vertical percolation of water from the upper aquifer into lower zones, there are other geologic features that define the Buttonwillow surface area. The first one I'll mention is the San Joaquin Valley syncline, which is also referred to as the Buttonwillow syncline, or the the Buttonwillow slough. And that is that long red line with the label San Joaquin Valley syncline. And that's the central axis of the Buttonwillow service area. And groundwater tends to move along that axis. And for about the lower southern 2/3 of the service area, the movement is southward generally. And for about the upper third, the movement is to the north. And we'll see some groundwater contour maps in a moment that will illustrate that.
Dr. Miller,
Yeah.
Dr. Miller, just for clarity, when you were using upper and lower, did you mean north as upper and south as lower?
Yes. Then you see the Buttonwillow anticline and the Burbank anticline and the semi-tropic anticline. And those are all ridges, really, that form barriers to impede groundwater flow to the east. And there is a gradient. Groundwater levels in Buena Vista are higher than those in areas to the east. So there's a gradient that would and does cause some flow in that direction. But these anticlines restrict that flow. So together with the E-clay, they form kind of a bucket where groundwater can be recharged in the Buttonwillow service area and pretty much stay there. There is some groundwater flow out of the area to the north that we'll see in a moment. And then there are no geologic impediments to flow to the south. So there is flow southward as well. Next slide, please. So this is a groundwater contour map from January 2015. And so the past drought had been going on for a while here, but this is generally shows the shape of groundwater contours in the Buttonwillow service area, showing water moving to the southeast in the lower 2/3 of the service area. You'll see two contours that are 220, and water from the southern contour would tend to move to the south, as shown by the elevations. And water from the northern contour would tend to move to the north. And then you'll see it the gradient would move it over to that eastward projection of the district, and then water would tend to flow between those anticlines that we looked at in the previous illustration. All right, now the next slide, please. And this is from October 2018. And so it shows a similar pattern of flow both to the north and to the south. You can see that the contours are more closely spaced, indicating a steeper gradient. And the interesting thing about this particular map is that in the previous one, the lowest elevation was at the extreme south of the service area. And in this one, you can see that the groundwater elevations trend drop as you move south to a point. And then at the very south, they reverse, and there's a level that's marked as 140. And we believe that this reversal in these higher groundwater levels in the extreme south are at least in part due to the 14,000 acre feet that were recharged basically at this location by the Palms project in 2017. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now something that has been touched on in previous testimony is the conversion of land from row crops to permanent crops, pistachios in particular, but not exclusively. And with that conversion, there has been kind of a parallel conversion in on-farm water irrigation practices. And so most tree crops and vineyards, vine, grapes are irrigated using drip and micro spray systems, and not with the furrows and gravity systems that are commonly used for row crops. And because of the greater flexibility and responsiveness of those on-farm systems, the district began a program to pipeline some of their distribution facilities so that the responsiveness of their distribution through pipelines would conform with that of the field systems. And so this is a list of a number of pipeline projects that the district put in place to improve their ability to serve their growers, to have and also to be able to very precisely measure deliveries to their growers. And in addition to that group of projects, there have been 3 recharge ponds that have been completed in the last few years: Corn Camp, Daly Ranch, and the Palms. And another initiative by the district has been to, at the district's expense, to put magnetic flow meters on all groundwater wells, production wells in the district, be they privately owned wells or district wells. So now there's very accurate data on groundwater production from throughout the district. The next slide, please. then this is simply a map of those pipelines that I showed earlier to indicate their location. And as you can see, they are spread throughout the district except in the south. And they began with the northern area pipeline, the one that is farthest to the north. Next slide, please. This is a figure from the GSP, and it shows the representative monitoring wells that are used for Sigma compliance in the Buttonwillow service area. And each of these wells has served and continues to serve as a district monitoring well. So it has a long history of being monitored by the district. But because of their distribution throughout the district, they, again, were chosen to be representative monitoring locations for Sigma compliance. And so it's at these locations that sustainable management criteria such as minimum thresholds and measurable objectives have been set. And we'll pay attention to 3 of these wells in subsequent slides. The first one is what's labeled as DMW04, which is about a quarter of the way down from the northern boundary of the district. And then the second one is DMW08, which is about a quarter of the way up from the southern boundary of the district. And the third is district monitoring well 12B, which is in the extreme south of the district. Next slide, please. So this is a hydrograph from 1994 to 2018 of that most northerly of those 3 wells. And it shows how effectively Buena Vista's conjunctive management projects or program and recharge, especially from canals and lateral systems, has been in maintaining stable groundwater elevations through wet years and dry in this area. Next slide, please. And this is the hydrograph from District Monitoring Well 08. And this is one located near the community Buttonwillow. And it shows how, although not as effective as the previous slide, shows still a very stable management of groundwater levels considering the hydrogeologic or the hydrologic conditions that existed over this period. I note that jagged, jump up and down in 2006 and 7, and I don't know the cause of that, and so I don't know the cause of that anomaly. An important thing about this well is that it is being near the community of Buttonwillow shows how the stable groundwater levels that really result from conjunctive management on the part of the district have benefited other domestic and commercial water users who rely exclusively on groundwater. Next slide, please. And then this is well 12B, the one that's farthest to the south. And as you can see, there's less control of groundwater elevations at this location. Something that's interesting here is if you look around the year, between 2016 and 2017, you'll see the low point. And then in 2017, you'll see a rebound in water levels. And this, again, we believe can be at least in part attributed to recharge at the palms that occurred in this period. All right, next slide. This is a map that's been shown previously, and this is a less crisp rendition of that. But if you look right at the sort of the middle, or halfway down from the top of this, and then about a quarter of the way in from the left, you'll see a blue square. And just below that square is an indication for well 13D. Just to the right of the square, and to the left, an indication for well 14M. And well 14M in the nomenclature of the, or is the nomenclature of the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee. And this is a map from a document of theirs. And well 14M corresponds to the well 12 that we've been looking at previously. Next slide, please. This is a hydrograph that actually we looked at yesterday, I think it was a more recent version of that, but it shows groundwater levels at well 13D, or as John Parker referenced them, groundwater pressures at this location. And this is illustrates the Kern Water Bank's data on the performance of this well, and shows how groundwater pressures have dropped at this location during the period of operation, but most significantly here between 2012 and 2017. So the years of the recent drought, not the current drought, and since this doesn't extend past 2017, we're not seeing any kind of benefits of recharge, which we would probably see in a more current drought. Next slide, please. And this is from the same report, and this is from district monitoring well 12A, which is the lower blue line, and 12B, which is the one we're interested in. And just an observation about well 12B, it is in an unconfined aquifer. It's above the E-clay, and so water pressures and groundwater elevations here are, pretty much equivalent. And also, being a monitoring well, it's not pumped, so it certainly doesn't reflect any effects of it being operated. But it is a reliable source of information for groundwater levels at its location. And we can see how the groundwater levels here track in shape very closely with that of the previous water bank well. An error in the labeling of this particular slide is that this hydrograph is labeled as being Kern Water Bank, or KWBA, by the first bullet. And in fact, this is a Buena Vista monitoring well. So 14M is district monitoring well 12 as correctly labeled, following that initial attribution to KWBA. And so this suggests that there is some connection between operations as observed at that water bank monitoring well and groundwater levels, or influence on groundwater levels in the southern part of Buena Vista. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so in conclusion, Buena Vista has a distinct setting, and the district and its growers have learned to develop groundwater management facilities and practices that benefit from that setting, and specifically conjunctive management that takes advantage of the storage that's available in the aquifer under the service area. And this is not to say that these practices are static, that they evolve with conditions. And as I indicated earlier when talking about the conversion from row crops to permanent crops, there have been major changes in the facilities that the district relies on to implement conjunctive management. But the approach has been consistent to divert water during high flow years when it's available and find ways to store it to provide sustainable groundwater or access to groundwater by a range of users during years, including quite dry ones. And as the groundwater contour maps and hydrographs have indicated, although this has been a moving target in terms of hydrography or hydrology and in terms of cropping practices, the districts and its growers have engaged in practices that have resulted in very stable groundwater elevations in the northern part of the district and in the central part of the district, and have had, more challenges managing groundwater elevations in the extreme south of the district. And so what this indicates is that there's no real benefit in reducing Buena Vista's access to diversion of high flows when they are available, because they have a system that has been working. The challenges that they face are not diminishing. There's no reason to believe that the hydrology of the Kern River is going to become more stable. And as we've seen, the area where they have the most kind of difficulty in maintaining sustainable groundwater levels is in the south. And so that indicates that there may be some connection between the operation of the district in the south and their capacity to do what they need to do to serve their growers and to maintain sustainable groundwater, and the operation of their neighbors. So that is something to be explored. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. In looking at the clock, it is 12:23. I propose we take a lunch break at this time to reconvene at 1:30. Is there anything we should address before we break for lunch? All right, I will see all of you back here. Please log out of the Zoom and log back in after lunch. I will see you at 1:30.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.